quick, I got a job for you, yeah? I got a mission of the highest importance. Tell me, what do you define to be mid-core content? Where did your mind go? Did it go to Delubrum Regine? Did it go to Bosja? Did it go to Chocobo Racing? Maybe you said Extreme Trials. Maybe, just maybe, you even said Savage Raiding. This is a conversation that has been raging in the MMORPG scene for years at this point, over a decade, and no one can seemingly come to a consensus as to what defines casual content, mid-core content, or hardcore content. The lines are blurry. They have near sight and far sight. They just can't see anything. Generally, most people understand what the highest end hardcore content is in a game. In World of Warcraft, that would be mythic raiding or pushing high keys, and in Final Fantasy XIV, that would absolutely, certainly be ultimate raiding, because if that's mid-core, what the heck is hardcore? But when you get closer to the definitions, closer to the lines, these things just become blurry, and they change from person to person. Hello, everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and in this video, I want to talk about one of the greatest, biggest, most seismic debates that happen in the MMORPG scene. What the heck is midcore? This is a conversation that has sprung up again with the release of the Chaotic Alliance Raid difficulty for Final Fantasy XIV. We got Cloud of Darkness 24-man. Some thought it was going to be closer to an Extreme Trial. Turns out, it's a bit more closer to Savage. Go to the comment section of anyone making content about this thing, and you will hear entire manifestos written by people talking about how this crap is borderline impossible to do in Party Finder, and that it's not mid-core content, it's hardcore content. And then you'll have other people saying, no, this is absolutely mid-core content. There's no shot that this is hardcore. And it's a fascinating conversation. And I want to talk about this elusive mid-core definition that we all know about, we all talk about it, we all agree that Final Fantasy XIV needs more mid-core content, but when you ask people specifically, how do you define mid-core content, what is mid-core content, you just get a whole bunch of different answers. It's like Schrodinger's mid-core, because if you ask someone who is probably an ultimate Praga or an ultimate Clear, they like wake up, do an ultimate raid before they get breakfast, if you ask them what is mid-core content, chances are they'll probably say Extreme Trials. Maybe a few of them will even say Savage content. Because if you're so experienced at that top level, at the top end, the content below that in terms of difficulty will feel way more casual. Because you don't need to focus or just play as hard as you have to do in the content you normally play. Or as in the content you normally play. But then if you ask someone who is an uber casual, and they just aren't experienced in organized group content, chances are they may even view those pieces of content that the hardcore player we just talked about views to be midcore. They may view things like Extreme Trials, let alone Savage Raiding, to be hardcore. And their definition of midcore may be something closer to, say, Bosja, Eureka. Maybe they'll even say normal raiding or just regular alliance raiding. So when we have a player base that is absolutely hungry, borderline feral, for content that isn't the hottest in the game, but fills out that perceived mid-core slot, regardless of the definition that you ascribe to mid-core, and they pump out this new thing, something new, chaotic. Ooh, sounds powerful, sounds cool. Whole bunch of rewards, testing new reward structures. Is it mid-core or hardcore? And like, that's the thing that I really want to hone in on in this video, because I think I've made it clear enough that people just cannot decide universally what these definitions truly are and where the boundaries begin and end. Some people will say chaotic is midcore, some will say it's hardcore. And at the end of the day, the way you define what is midcore, what is casual, what is hardcore will be based on your own experience and what you want out of the game. It's a highly, highly, highly subjective topic. But when we talk about casual, midcore, and hardcore content, it gives off the feeling that it's an objective list, but when you stop to really think about it, it's not. And that's where this entire conversation gets muddied, because everybody just has different definitions for all of these ranges of content. And it's a phenomenon that I see on the internet all the time, and it's not just relegated to Final Fantasy XIV or even other games like World of Warcraft or other MMORPGs. This is something that I see on the internet all the time, where people debate terminology instead of the spirit of the discussion. When it concerns Final Fantasy XIV, a lot of people will agree the game needs more mid-core content. But the problem is we don't define necessarily what that type of content should be. We just say that the game needs more mid-core content, or needs more casual content. So the conversation becomes more about terminology rather than the heart and the soul of the matter, and providing usable, constructive feedback and criticism. Going into Dawntrail, I was never under the illusion that Chaotic was going to solve any issue this game was going to have. It was just going to be a nice piece of content for some people who like to do that kind of stuff, but it wasn't going to solve the heart and soul of the issue that I at least see in the endgame of Final Fantasy XIV. That is the lack of content that really leans into the elements of being an MMORPG in the open world. Chaotic is at least harder content than a regular Alliance raid with more people. I like the fact that there's more people because it's an MMORPG. But notice what I said before. Final Fantasy XIV is a game whose endgame is highly reliant on instance-based scenarios. Whether that be trials, dungeons, roulettes, normal raids, savage raids, ultimate raids, alliance raids, whatever, a lot of the actual endgame is locked up behind instance-based content instead of being out in the world. It's why I personally like things like Bosja, and if I gave Eureka a shot, I would probably like it there as well. Because at the end of the day, Final Fantasy XIV is an MMORPG. It is designed to be a game where a bunch of people populate an in-game world together. And we can get hung up too much on genre descriptions, absolutely. Same spirit of the argument as people getting too hung up on what necessarily constitutes mid-core or hardcore content. However, in my eyes at least, Final Fantasy XIV lacks new, refreshing content that takes place outside of instances. So whether or not we can come to a consensus about whether or not Chaotic is mid-core or hardcore, it's not addressing that root issue that I personally have. You may not have this issue, which is entirely fine. We all want something different out of Final Fantasy XIV. But I don't see Chaotic as being something that moves the needle much for any single individual. And I've talked about this before. When I look to the future of Dawntrail, it is getting a lot of that content that I wanted to have. It's just, we have to wait for numerous patches into Dawntrail's patch release cycle to actually get these pieces of content, which is par for the course for Final Fantasy XIV. I just don't think it's necessarily that healthy of a release cycle, because it leads to these periods of large inactivity, where if you are not one of those high-end raider type people who loves to do this instance-based content, and that's your bread and butter, that's what gets you up in the morning, you just absolutely adore it. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that that type of content is readily provided in Dawntrail right now. Whereas a lot of the content that was advertised for Dawntrail, stuff like Cosmic Exploration, stuff like the new Bosja-esque content, stuff like Criterion, stuff like Deep Dungeons, that's not in the game yet. And it's all well and good that it will be added to the game, but that to me is the type of content that Final Fantasy XIV is severely lacking in right now. And I don't see Chaotic as filling that gap. I don't think it was supposed to. That's my position on Chaotic. It's cool for those who want to do it, but I don't see it really moving the needle for anybody. But I do like them at least experimenting with harder content in a 24-man scenario. Maybe the tuning's a bit too high when it comes to Cloud of Darkness. You can rein it back in if you want to try this again in the future. But I at least like that they're trying to do something with more players. But what I think this whole conversation about whether or not Chaotic Cloud of Darkness fits mid-core or hardcore content, I think that's missing the overall discussion that should be happening. Because we're debating a specific definition that no one will really come to a consensus on, instead of debating the qualities and virtues of the piece of content that was released. And if this is something that should become a staple of of Final Fantasy XIV going into the future, like Unreal Trials have become. And I've seen a lot of conversation about Chaotic Cloud of Darkness, specifically pertaining to Party Finder, and that if it was designed to be cleared in the Party Finder, then it has largely categorically failed to do that, or at least to be a piece of content readily downable in the Party Finder. And going back to what we were talking about before, some people describe mid-core content as what you can do in the Party Finder. I remember them talking about how they wanted this thing to land somewhere between an extreme trial and a savage raid, and it seemingly has landed closer to savage than, say, extreme. Here's my 2 cents on this issue. I'm not saying that I'm objectively correct or anything, I'm just saying these are my opinions. I don't think in an MMORPG that it is unhealthy or bad to provide content where communication is supposed to happen in order to get a kill. That is seemingly, at least, what Cloud of Darkness is. I think one of the big reasons I have at least seen in a lot of comment sections, not my own, because I haven't covered chaotic raiding myself, but watching other content and reading the comment sections there, I think one of the big reasons we're seeing a lot of pushback to this implementation of chaotic stems from the structures of this game's content to begin with. A lot of the hard content in Final Fantasy XIV is largely 8-man. Whether that's an extreme trial, savage raiding, or even an ultimate raid, largely that stuff is relegated to an 8-man scenario. So the people that are used to doing hard content in this game probably have that short list of buddies to do it with. There's not too much that requires 24-man, Delubrum Regine Savage being like one of the few exceptions. But generally speaking, groups are formed for those 8-man scenarios. So when Chaotic comes out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, but you know what I mean. When Chaotic descends from the heavens, the very firmament, and says, okay, now for this level of difficulty, get 3 times the players. I think in that scenario, and in the specific case of Final Fantasy XIV, the way most people are going to interface with this content is either through Discord groups that form, or the Party Finder. And when you have difficult content, it becomes even more difficult the more people you have, because that's more points of failure, especially if all those roles are needed. It's one of the reasons that World of Warcraft has migrated away from its old raid style back in the days of vanilla that had raids of 40 people in it. Now you can do raiding with just like 10 people, and some people prefer that because the more and more people you have in a raid, especially if they're mandatory, there's more points of failure introduced by player error, especially if one person's mistake can have a rippling effect and it'll eventually at least lead to a group wipe. Especially in a modern MMO landscape, people don't like having their time wasted, or at least having the perception of their time wasted. You have a combination of people that get frustrated when it's like 1 or 2 guys in the group that just keep wiping the group over and over and over again, to where you physically can't do anything better, you're just hoping this other guy out of your control can shape up, or you happen to be that guy and you become frustrated in the idea that everyone else can do this but you can't like stick the landing. You feel as if you're a burden and you become disincentivized to continue trying. If you already are playing with a group of buddies that can help you out, show you the ropes and all that, but if you're just pugging it in the Party Finder, people may leave, you may get kicked, and I think this is all a symptom of the beginning stages of introducing higher end content for higher numbers of people. The game has had it before, but it's not frequent. It's not like a pillar of the endgame for Final Fantasy XIV. Chaotic could become that if they want to really keep going in this direction, and maybe a growing pain isn't the right way to describe it, but it's kind of like that. At least that's the feeling I'm getting and the vibe I'm picking up. And I think there are things that Square Enix could do to help try and push the community past this issue, and that is implementing more tools in the game that don't require third party in order to strategize and communicate better in-game. Stuff like that raid tool that they kept talking about before. I'm not sure if that's been implemented yet, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think something like that would be greatly beneficial for Chaotic. But yeah, those are my 2 cents. It's a fascinating situation that Final Fantasy XIV has found itself in. Here's what I want you to do. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts on Chaotic, and how would you personally make it better? What would be your suggestions, your constructive feedback to improve Chaotic, and what direction do you think they should take it in the future? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.